Have you ever wondered how a scam can take away someone's retirement savings without promising quick riches, without flashy returns, and without even mentioning risk? If you believe financial scams always begin with greed, this story will force you to reconsider. Because some predators are not hunting people who want more. They hunt people who only want to feel safe. The man in today's story is 68 years old. He is not the type to chase risky opportunities. He spent decades living with discipline, saving consistently, avoiding bad debt, and believing that retirement is the stage of life when money must be protected more carefully than ever. Then one day, he received an introduction that sounded reasonable, mature, and perfectly aligned with the mindset of someone entering the second half of life. An investment opportunity designed specifically for retirees. No promises of high returns. No unrealistic numbers. Just one word, repeated calmly and confidently: safe. In financial consumer protection reports, the OECD has emphasized that older adults can be particularly vulnerable to fraud and financial abuse, especially when bad actors exploit trust and reliance on information from others. Regulators such as the SEC have long warned about schemes labeled safe, low risk, or guaranteed, which quietly funnel victims into opaque investments through channels such as self-directed IRAs, real estate, private bonds, or alternative products that are difficult to verify. My name is Dolan. On the Financial Secrets channel, I do not tell stories to scare you. I tell them to help you recognize one crucial truth. The most dangerous scams do not always target greed. They target the fear of losing security. And once you understand that, you will understand why 2 years later, the 68-year-old man could no longer find the company, the paperwork, or the path back. The 68-year-old man entered retirement with a mindset that is extremely common, yet rarely spoken out loud. He did not dream of becoming richer. He feared only one thing: losing what he had spent his entire life building. After leaving full-time work, steady income disappeared. Medical costs slowly increased. Financial markets remained unpredictable. Every economic headline carried a quiet sense of unease. For him, the question was no longer how to make more money, but how to ensure his existing savings would not erode. During this period, he did what many older Americans do. He turned to familiar and trusted sources of information. Someone within his retirement community introduced him to an investment firm that specialized in serving retirees. Their website was polished, their language was cautious, there was no exaggeration or hype. They spoke about capital preservation, defensive strategies, assets that were not highly volatile like the stock market. Everything was packaged in calm, reasonable terms. The first meeting did not feel like a sales pitch. There was no pressure, no deadlines, no charts showing explosive growth. The advisor spent most of the time asking about life after retirement, spending plans, and the biggest concerns over the next 10 or 20 years. When the man said his greatest fear was having to return to work at 70 because he ran out of money, the advisor nodded, as if he had heard that sentence hundreds of times before. They did not call it a risky investment. They called it a solution designed for retirees, an opportunity not meant for the general public. No public advertising, only private referrals. This quietly created a feeling of being selected, understood, and protected from the financial chaos outside. OECD consumer protection reports note that fraud schemes targeting older adults often rely on personal relationships and trust rather than mass marketing. They are designed to feel like guidance, not transactions. That distinction lowers a person's natural defenses. The man signed the paperwork not out of ambition, but relief. He believed he had found a safe place for his retirement savings. He believed he was acting responsibly. And in that moment, there were no obvious signs that he had just stepped into a trap built with patience. During the first year, everything unfolded exactly as the man expected. He received periodic updates written in calm, measured language, always emphasizing that the primary goal was capital preservation. There were no dramatic profit reports, no encouragement to invest more. Instead, familiar phrases appeared again and again: stable, defensive, suitable for retirees. That quiet consistency reinforced his belief that he had made the right choice. The investment was described as being tied to alternative assets considered less volatile: long-term rental real estate, privately issued bonds. A small portion connected to stable digital assets that were said to be risk managed. Each concept was complex enough to discourage detailed questioning, yet familiar enough to avoid panic. The advisor repeatedly said this was not something to monitor daily. For retirees, the best approach was to let time do its work. In the second year, communication began to change subtly. Updates became less frequent. When the man emailed to ask about legal documentation, responses still arrived, but more slowly. The explanations sounded technical but reassuring. The market was restructuring. Capital was being reallocated. There was no reason for concern. Each time, he told himself he was overreacting. After all, this was a long-term investment. Another signal appeared, one he did not immediately recognize. New documents no longer included the familiar legal entity name. Logos changed slightly. Contact addresses shifted to different representative offices. When asked, the advisor explained it as restructuring to optimize taxes and operating costs. It sounded reasonable. For someone no longer working in finance, these details felt too minor to trigger alarm. According to warnings from the SEC, many investment scams targeting retirees deliberately extend the early phase with artificial calm. No shocks, no red flags, just gradual conditioning, training victims to accept not having direct control over their assets. OECD reports also point out that as information becomes increasingly vague over time, victims often assume the problem is their own lack of understanding, not the investment itself. The man began to feel a quiet, unnamed anxiety. Not panic, not sleeplessness, just a growing sense that he no longer fully understood what was happening to his money. Yet because the investment had been marketed as safe, he felt even less willing to acknowledge that fear. Admitting it meant facing the possibility that he had made a mistake. And for someone already retired, that possibility felt more frightening than market volatility. The collapse did not arrive in a dramatic moment. It arrived quietly. One morning, the man opened his email and realized that 3 weeks had passed without a single update. He sent a follow-up message. There was no reply. He called the familiar number. A cold, automated voice answered. He reassured himself that it was probably a temporary issue. A few days later, he tried to access the company's website. The homepage was gone. Only a brief error message appeared. He reviewed old documents. Several links inside the investment materials no longer worked. The domain name had vanished from search results. The unease was no longer vague. It became specific, heavy. He called the acquaintance who had introduced the opportunity. The call went unanswered. Messages were not returned. Within the small retirement community, quiet conversations began to circulate. Some people said they could not reach anyone either. Others said their online accounts were locked. Each person held only fragments of information, but together a clear picture emerged. When the man contacted attorneys and authorities, the response was familiar and detached. The company no longer existed on paper. The legal entity had been dissolved. Investment structures were layered through intermediaries. Most assets could not be traced. There was no clear documentation to pursue litigation. No identifiable individual accountable. According to SEC warnings, this is the typical endpoint of many fake investment schemes targeting retirees. Not a loud crash, but a calculated disappearance. By the time victims realize what has happened, too much time has passed. Evidence is incomplete. Recovery is nearly impossible. OECD reports further emphasize that these scams often cause psychological damage greater than the financial loss, because victims feel betrayed by their own need for security. 2 years earlier, the man signed documents feeling at ease. 2 years later, he sat at his kitchen table, sorting through stacks of paper that now meant nothing. No company, no accounts, no answers. Only one question repeating in his mind: how could something called safe disappear as if it never existed? After the initial shock, the 68-year-old man did not immediately collapse. What followed was more dangerous: silence. He did not tell his children. He did not confide in friends, not because he did not need help, but because shame settled deeply. He had always seen himself as cautious. He had avoided obvious scams his entire life, yet this time he lost money not out of greed, but out of trust in what felt responsible. When authorities explained that recovery was nearly impossible, he did not argue. He simply nodded. In his mind, the story shifted from losing money to losing direction. The carefully planned retirement no longer made sense. Everything had to be reconsidered. Time off, family visits, expenses once assumed secure, all became uncertain. According to SEC analysis, the most severe consequence of scams targeting retirees is not financial loss alone, but the psychological state in which older adults are forced to make decisions afterward. OECD highlights that many victims withdraw entirely from the financial system, losing trust in any investment, including legitimate tools needed to sustain long-term stability. The man began living more cautiously, not because of the market, but because of himself. Every spending decision carried the fear of making another mistake. Every piece of financial advice, even from credible sources, was viewed with suspicion. What the scammers took was not only money, they took his sense of control and confidence, already fragile in later life. This story does not end with recovery. There is no miracle, no unexpected compensation. It ends with a quiet reality. A choice made in pursuit of safety resulted in prolonged uncertainty, and the silence that followed became the most expensive cost of all. If there is one central lesson from this story, it is this uncomfortable truth: safety in investing is not a natural attribute, it is a promise, and every promise in finance must be verified. The 68-year-old man did nothing reckless. He did not chase high returns. He trusted the feeling of being protected. That trust caused him to overlook the most important questions. According to SEC warnings, any investment marketed as safe for retirees that lacks transparency in legal structure, registration, and oversight carries significant risk. True safety does not come from gentle language or calm advisors. It comes from clear legal frameworks, independent verification, and genuine investor control over assets. OECD reports highlight a critical paradox. As people age, they seek stability and simplicity. Yet oversimplification creates fertile ground for fraud. When a product is presented as something you do not need to fully understand, monitor, or worry about, that is precisely when you should pause and ask more questions. The lesson is not to avoid investing in retirement. It is to recognize that this stage demands greater transparency, not less. Suitable investments for retirees must be easy to verify, easy to exit, and easy to explain to others. If you cannot clearly describe your investment to a family member, there is a strong chance you do not truly understand it yourself. This story reminds us that fear of losing security is a powerful emotion. It can cause intelligent people to make mistakes without realizing it. And in personal finance, the greatest danger is not market volatility, but blind trust disguised as caution. If you are approaching retirement, or if your parents are hearing offers labeled safe, this story is not meant to frighten you. It is meant to slow you down. Slow down to verify. Slow down to ask difficult questions. Slow down before handing full financial control to anyone simply because they say exactly what you want to hear. The SEC consistently emphasizes that retirees must verify all investments through official channels, confirm registration status of individuals and firms, and avoid complex structures explained with reassurance instead of data. OECD also recommends open communication with family as a critical layer of protection against financial fraud among older adults. On the Financial Secrets channel, we do not give specific investment advice. We do something else. We tell the stories few people want to talk about so you can recognize the signals before it is too late. Signals often hidden behind calm language, reasonable behavior, and promises of safety. If this story makes you reconsider an investment offer, pause, verify, share it with someone you trust if needed. Sometimes financial protection does not begin with a big decision, but with choosing not to decide until you truly understand. If you find stories like this valuable, follow the channel and continue listening to Financial Secrets. Because real safety does not come from promises. It comes from awareness.